Good morning all and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion. This week we're going to be looking at preparing for sale, your 5-year roadmap to acquisition. Mind you, bearing on what we're going to talk about today, I don't think you have to be working to an acquisition or working to an event. However, I think what we're going to talk about today is really important for any business to have a plan and then how they execute that plan to make sure the business is moving forward and growing in the right way. So again, when I do some sort of research into this, I looked at sort of what businesses are doing with regarding to business plans. So according to Nazar, okay, in the US, every month, this is every month in the US, can you imagine this? Over 543,000 new businesses start. But in the first 2 years, only 7 out of 10 are still in business, where in the 5 years later, 5 out of 10 are still in business. And interesting, when they started to review this, the businesses that managed to survive 5 years, over 70% of them had a strategic business plan that they were following. Research from Barclays in the UK said that 1 in 4 small companies, 23% was the actual number, do not have a business plan. Approximately 47% of UK small businesses have a formal written plan in place, while the remaining 25% have a verbal plan in place. But what they found was the vast majority of those with verbal and no business plan didn't survive 2 years. 50% of new businesses die within the first 5 years, and it's often because they didn't follow a business plan. Businesses do not have a plan. Around about 25% of them will die within 2 years of startup. Now, a lot of the companies we have on these webinars are not startups, so it's interesting. But what it says that around about 30%, a business that has a business plan will create a 30% chance of growth and the chance of doubling the size of their business by following a business plan. 70% of venture capitalists perceive a written business plan as an extremely important indicator before they purchase a business. And the 6 top reasons why business plans fail, according to venture capitalists, are not investigating the marketplace, a business plan where you have problems that they don't tend to follow and have a solution to that problem, lack of financing, bad internet presence and marketing, remaining too rigid to the original plan. And obviously, one of the things that they said happens quite a lot to new businesses is expanding too fast, which we see quite a lot. So the rate of business failure in the first 2 years, we know is quite high. It's around about 20%. But what it means is that we don't have to fail. The research says that those that follow a plan and are flexible to that plan can afford many of the pitfalls of a business. And a part of that 25% that have no business plan, 25% that have a business plan make it beyond 15 years. So it says that a business plan is truly important to the development of your business and the growth of your business. Today, there's just Heather and I. Dave Pye is on his way to sunny Scotland, to Edinburgh, and Mr. Jacobs is at the other side of the country. He's down in Bristol, and he's just sort of jumped into a client meeting in Bristol. So unfortunately, he couldn't join us today. So Heather, it's just me and you, which makes a great change.
It's the cream, Howard. It's the cream.
Well, I wasn't going to say it was the cream of the crop. What I was going to say was that at least we get a chance to have a conversation before the rest of everyone jumps in. So it's going to be really interesting. So let's look at business plans. And it'd be interesting from your side, from a HR perspective, looking at the delivery of business plans. Then we'll look at how we can build business plans as well and look at both sides and bring them in. So the first question up is, why is having a business plan, I'm just listening to what we just talked about, why is having a business plan so important?
Actually, Howard, I always find your statistics and the data you find really interesting, but those statistics this morning, I think, are really relevant to that question, because clearly having a business plan makes a difference with the likelihood of you succeeding or not succeeding. So, and I think one of the reasons is that having a business is way more complicated than sometimes entrepreneurs understand when they start out. And there are so many things that you need to think about when you're setting out a business and plan for, that it's very easy to be distracted by just the immediacy of what's in front of you. and having a proper map and a process of creating a business plan that enables you to think about all of the things that are going to be important about, you know, marketing and funding, and IT and setup and staffing and culture, and, you know, all of the different aspects of what is incredibly complicated. I think it's easy to get distracted and lost and off site if you haven't got a plan to keep you on track. So for me, that's one of the most important reasons why we do it. It's more complicated than often we think. And having a plan means that you're forced to think about all of the things that you need to think about as an entrepreneur.
It is funny when we sort of pull that back into the recruitment market, and a lot of the recruitment people that I speak to have just opened up, and I do the new training for the REC for new companies coming into the marketplace. And it's interesting when you start to speak to recruiters who are highly successful recruiters, and they start to talk about the end of that day. They're going, oh my God, I didn't realize there was so much to actually running a business. And they never actually thought about that. They'd just sort of taken that massive leap into the leap of faith into running their own business and not realize what that means. And I think when you start thinking about a business plan, I always think about four things. I think about strategy, execution, people, and cash. And most businesses have a business plan that's based around what I would call financial performance, where the business plan should be about service delivery. And if we focus on the service and look at developing, improving, and becoming more aligned to the marketplace, then our plan not only kickstarts growth, but starts to develop the business in a very different way. If we just focus purely on financials, then we're in a really poor position. And what we've got to start to think about is future-proofing the business. So whether you start your business in a recession or whether you start your business in a boom time, you know, you've got to think about future-proofing your business. So having a business plan is really important to that. So you start to look at the challenges that they say that COVID had brought, you know, from a client market to a candidate market, and we start to think about those that had a business plan and start to change their business plan. They start to change their offering, and they start to change how they viewed the marketplace. So I think it's, again, if you haven't got a plan, do you know what you're actually changing, what you're doing? So having a plan sort of keeps you on track. It gives you milestones to achieve financially, but it gives you areas to improve the assets of your business. And it's the assets of the business that create the value within your business. So when you start to look at net profit or EBITDA, that's one measure. But if you want to grow multiple players within your business to increase the opportunities for people to buy your business and increase the value of it, then there's so many more things. The management team, the quality of your client relationships, your modus operandi. And one of the big things is your brand presence to help you drive revenue into your business, which is basically driving candidates and good consultants into your business. And I think sometimes we don't think about all of those things when we start to pull a business plan together. And I think the biggest thing when we talk about pulling a business plan together is most recruitment agencies work in a small niche market, but they're very obscure in that marketplace, i.e. not everybody knows them. So if you have a business plan that's about delivery of service, getting your brand out there, then it's about how do you become a market leader. So your business plan should always be about driving that message and building that message forward to always ensure that the business is seen and the business plan is being followed to make sure people actually deliver what they want. Which makes a question, you know, as the market changed and we pull away from COVID, we're going to sort of enter a new economic cycle. So the question is, how should leaders react if the roadmap, the business plan suddenly has to change?
And it's an interesting idea, isn't it? Because I think the very process of creating a business plan is really important for the success of a business. So because as I said at the beginning, it's, you know, creating a plan and thinking about all of the things that you need to understand to make a successful business is one of the fundamental planks of creating a successful business. And actually that process is really important. But it's not a one-off exercise. And I think this is what this question goes to, Howard, that, you know, writing a business plan and sticking it in the cupboard or in a drawer or somewhere on a folder on your computer, that's, you know, that's not going to work. So business plans have to live and breathe, and they have to be constantly kept under review. And COVID showed us that, didn't it? You know, everything changed in COVID, and everybody needed to revisit their business plan. But as you say, if you've got a plan, at least you know what are the things that you need to look at and review, and what's your base point, and what are you changing. And so for me, leaders reacting to roadmaps changing is about being responsive. It's about your plan being a living, breathing, active document that you are able to use as a plank of your response to change. And you know, we're not out of the woods yet. There's more change to come. The economic cycle is changing. Nobody's quite sure where it's going and what's happening. And so keeping your business plan under constant review and being able to deal with change. So when your business plan changes, it's not just your business plan that's changing, it's everything that your organization needs to be focused on, and everything the people in it need to change their focus on. And so helping your teams to be responsive to change, and to communicate the changes in the things that are important to you. You know, one of the fundamentals was when we moved from being in a candidate rich market to being in a candidate short market. You know, did we communicate that fundamental change in the focus of our business and our business planning when the market changed? And there will be more changes like that. So I think leadership has to be very responsive, has to keep these things under constant review, and has to communicate those changes to the teams so that you're targeting different things, you're rewarding different things, you're asking your leadership team, your staff to behave in different ways.
It's interesting. I've always put that down to the discipline of the business and the discipline of the management team within the business. Because you're right. How many times do I go into a company and I ask them about what business plan they have, and they bring out a document. It's covered in dust. You know, it was written in 1902, and it was like, okay, what is this document? What's it has to do with the business? And they said, well, that's the business plan we wrote when we started the business. And and they've never followed it. They've never done anything. So I was thinking, if you have to change your business plan, then to me, or the market suddenly changed, and it's about stop, breathe, and think. What a lot of people did in COVID is they buried their heads in the sand. And if COVID taught us anything, is that we need to adapt, and we need to be able to change our roadmap accordingly to what's actually happening. And what a lot of people then started to try to do was plan for the inevitable. But you never know what's actually around the corner. No one could plan for COVID, etc., etc. And if we actually said, do we know when the next economic cycle is going to go into a boom or into a bust situation? We don't truly really know. We can have a guess, but we don't know. So if we start to look at businesses, if a business does nothing, they're starting to retreat. So if we don't change a plan or don't have a plan, then we're probably going backwards at anything. So I think when the market changes, to me, this is where the true leaders start to step up. And this is what you were talking about. It's about increasing your output and investment into actually acquiring the market. And I always thought I remember as a recruiter in the mid-90s, and it was in recession, a far worse recession than, from an unemployment point of view than we had now. We had over 10% of the marketplace in unemployment. I had my best years as a recruiter in those marketplaces because they were in recession, because I thought I had to work harder than everybody else. In that 2008 to 2010 time, when the financial
remember it well
came, I remember sat there, and I'm sure I've told this story to a number of people. Well, on a Monday, I was gifted by a deco. Here, we've just bought spring. Off you go. You now have spring, the north of England, spring Scotland, etc. And I remember meeting the head of the spring team in Scotland, who was waxing lyrical about his 450 contractors out and how good it was. And then on Friday, didn't turn up to my management meeting. And when I ring them on Friday afternoon to find out why he hadn't turned up to his management meeting, it's because 400 of those contractors had just been terminated by RBS. And so it was there. However, in that time, I had my biggest organic growth across my businesses because we changed our approach. We looked for opportunities to exploit. So in the upturn and the downturn, there's massive opportunities to exploit. So it's about creating those opportunities, and every market will be different. So if your roadmap suddenly has to change, it's about embracing it. So like COVID, you're probably not going to see it coming, but when it comes, what you can't do is bury your head in the sand. And we still see quite lots of people who sort of did that through the COVID period. And as we're coming out, they're massively behind the curve of acceleration that lots of recruitment agencies are seeing because they did bury their head in the sand. So I think when things change and new economic cycles kick in, leaders need to react. And the best way to react is if you have a roadmap and a strategy, it's easier to change that than rather flounder around and have nothing to change and just hope you're going in the right direction. So it is important to look at that. So we talk a lot about having the end in mind, and it's a shame that Dave's not here because he loves the end in mind. What's the end in mind? So my question then is, why is it important to have your journey planned out?
And this is really interesting about taking your team with you through change. The act of creating a business plan and creating your vision for your business doesn't happen in isolation, and you can't deliver it on your own. And so you have to take your team with you on that journey. Now, whether that's because you involve some of them or all of them, depending on the size of your business, in creating your business plan, or whether it's that you're then talking about communicating with them their part in it and their contribution to realizing your vision for the organization. This stuff doesn't happen in isolation. It's not going to happen without the people in your team understanding what the vision is, what the end goal is, and what the part is that they're going to play in that. So for me, the journey is absolutely as important as the end goal, because who are we going to need to hire? What kind of people are we going to need to hire? What are we going to need to train them? What are the building blocks of our marketing strategy to get our brand out there? All of those things, that action plan or your 90-day sprints or whatever it is just as important as the identification of your end goal.
So I think it's interesting with that end in mind, and we talk about putting I always talk about your business plan shouldn't be, have a stop at the end. It should carry on. So the end in mind should be whatever that event is, but then the business plan should carry on along that. And as we know, as COVID came in, our journey will change. But to me, it's having a direction of where to go and understanding that direction may have to change because of, whatever is thrown in front of you will change that. And I think, the importance of the journey is all about the mini milestones that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And this is where that financial planning fails as a business strategy.
Yeah.
Because if you're only putting a financial plan in place and you're not putting a strategic plan behind that of how you're going to change your offering, how you're going to attract more people, how you're going to develop those people, how you're going to create a succession plan, etc., 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 then what you never get is further down that journey. And, I suppose what the stat that backs that up is the stat that is it something like 90% of all recruitment agencies in the UK have 10 heads and less in it. And if that's the case, what you're saying is that they haven't got a plan to get beyond 10 heads and grow beyond 10 heads. And the reason why that is probably because all they've got is a financial plan in front of them, and they're trying to hit the financial plan. And so therefore they're never developing the people that will help them develop the plan on a long-term basis, because lots of recruiters tend to think about today, tomorrow never comes, and it's all about today. And what we do is review the past and we beat people up about what they've done in the past. We never look at the future journey. And yet, if I asked, anybody on this call, if I asked, Claire Ashbury, who's based in Manchester, right, Claire, jump in your car now and drive to where I am, she may have a vague idea of where I am, but the panic starts to kick in when I say, you need to come directly to my house. What's the quickest journey to get there? So you'd plan the route, you'd look at the route and you'd get there, but you need to know where that end destination is. So you know that you've got the best route to get there. Things may have to change, roadworks, etc., etc., etc. But what we're saying constantly is that the importance of the journey being planned out will enable you to get to the end point in a quicker fashion, rather than going round and round in circles at some points and never being able to get off that roundabout because you're forever, ever going round in circles. So the question that leads me to, because we all, for those people that had business plans, if we went back 2 years ago and looked at the plans we made with our clients then as we entered lockdown, what changes have you implemented? And I know you've been working as a big company, you joined us. What changes was implemented to help that journey adapt to the ever-changing landscape of what we're classing now as the new business era?
Yeah, and this is actually a really difficult question for me, Howard, because my life has changed so much in the last the last 2 years. So I think actually I'm just about at my 1 year anniversary of joining Jump. So
Wow.
I don't have a 2-year history. I don't have a 2-year history with my clients. But what I have really noticed is those organizations with business plans and with ambitious growth plans and who have lived through the experience of COVID, spending more time and putting more focus on developing their senior teams. And certainly there's people on the call that I've been involved in doing that with, really making sure that you've got a succession plan in place and that you're spreading some of that leadership skill across your organization to share the load as well, because part of the reason we started doing these webinars, I know before I started, was all about the kind of isolation that you get sometimes in leadership, and in a situation like COVID, goodness me, was it isolating for leaders of small recruitment businesses to kind of go, oh my god, what do I do? And so I think one of the big changes I've seen is spreading the leadership throughout organizations, spreading the development, building succession plans, and also building networks and mentors to with that real acknowledgement that I don't have to do this on my own. There are specialists and experts out there who can help me with my journey, with my growth plans, with my scaling, with my adaptation, and that real willingness in businesses to say, do you know, I'd really love to have somebody to talk to about this and not have to have the burden of being an entrepreneur by myself. And so for me, that's not perhaps the answer you'd get from Dave and Paul, because they've got longer relationships. This is a bit newer to me, Howard. So but that's my perspective on it as a newbie into this world.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you start to think about that, and even that you came from a big organization,
Yes.
multiple operation organization, and the way they changed their plans, but looking at what you've got when you start to go into smaller companies and how they've still had to change and adapt. And I think the big thing that started to change was, as we talked about earlier, going from a client-led market to a candidate-led market. So candidate attraction strategies have hugely changed. But I think the big change that I started to see was clients actually putting in, or recruitment agencies actually putting in, consultant retention strategies. And I think we did a webinar about, is retention the new recruitment? And they're the two real big things that I've started to see. But what I've started to see over the last 6 months, and I've been doing lots of management training with businesses, but the thing that I've started to do lots more over the last 6 months is people now actually understanding that the way they are selling recruitment services to our clients isn't working. And we need to change the way that we sell our services, and we need to compartmentalize our services down a whole lot more, and then learn to sell. And to me, selling is the agreement of our services and the client's needs, and then we start to negotiate. And it's interesting that when you start to break down the sale of what people are doing, from that contingency to an exclusive to retain to talent advisory, we're suddenly getting lots more small recruitment agencies suddenly understanding that they can compete with the bigger players in the marketplace. They can do talent advisory, maybe not do RPO, but they can do talent advisory. They can do these type of things. And they're suddenly stepping up their opportunity to take market share within a client, but also driving up their fees. So long, the clients I'm working with, long as they're gone, as I was with a client in Bristol on Monday, and they were still saying that we tend to, when we are pushed by a client, we drop our pants straight away. because they haven't got anything to push back with. As soon as we started to break their sale down and they started to understand what they could push back with, they suddenly realized, actually, as this is part of the strategy we've never talked about, we've just sold our services, but now we're breaking it down. Now we're pushing back. Now we can start to increase our fees. And it was interesting, on Tuesday, they said they were pitching to a client and they changed their pitch. And what they actually changed in the pitch was they changed how they were going to sell their services, but they increased their fee.
And I've been involved in some great webinars and discussions about this with the REC, as well as previous ones we've done at Jump, Howard. That whole piece about remembering and developing your staff to understand that the second half of their job title is as important as the first, and that acting as a consultant to your clients, and valuing the enormous amount of knowledge that we as recruiters have about the marketplace. We don't always value that, we just assume, well, everybody knows this stuff because it's what we're immersed in every day. But actually what we know as recruiters is genuinely valuable to our clients. And as you say, being able to break it down and package it in such a way that we can truly act as consultants to our clients, I think has been a really positive change in terms of valuing our service.
Yeah. But what we take is our service for granted. We never upgrade our service and deliver a different service. Hence why it's so easy for a client to push our fees down. And once you start to push back and the client understands, and it goes back to that, they use this conversation an awful lot, that prospect to suspect relationship. We see every client as a prospect, they see every recruitment agency as a suspect. But once they start to see a different service and the breakdown of the service and how that service can actually affect them, we have a prospect to prospect relationship because they see us as a prospect for them to develop their staff. So this webinar was about, if you were looking to create an event in 5 years, whether that be to sell the business, to where we want to get their business to a certain point in time, etc. In your experience, and bear in mind you've been in this market for a year, if you looked and said, what do you think are the 3 most important assets a company needs to build? And you can go back to your Engage days and look at the assets that they were building. What assets, what 3 important assets would you say a company needs to build to A, be successful and go beyond those 10 heads, and B, then get a business that people would look at and say, actually, yes, that's worth buying and that's worth the value that I think we should pay for it?
So the word for me that encapsulates all of this is sustainability. So I'm obviously looking at it from a people and culture point of view, Howard, rather than what a venture capitalist who is investing in your business or a bank or might look at. But for me, sustainability is really important. So sustainable relationships with clients, sustainable relationships with your staff, so that you're retaining people. They're 2, not 3. But it's all about, is it repeatable business? Is it something, if I buy you and the person I buy the business off isn't going to be in the business anymore, is the business sustainable? So strong relationships with good clients, good track record of sustainable business with clients. And have I got a structure that shows I can grow? Why would I buy a business that's got 8 heads in it, and has it had 8 heads in it for 5 years? Where's the trajectory for growth? So have we got a sustainable growth model that shows we can bring people in, we can train and develop them and make them productive? So that's the other side of sustainability. It's that ability to attract and develop, retain and engage the people in the business. So I'm sure that's not a traditional perspective on it, but from my people perspective, that's what I think is important for us to look at.
So it was interesting. I was speaking to a company the other day that buys and acquires recruitment agencies, and we were talking about the change that's gone, and they were talking about what they look for and the different things they're looking now. And one of the things that they came out for at the moment was they're looking at the brand and how well the brand is implemented either in the niche market or the bigger market, etc. And what they're talking about is not just the brand, have you got a good brand presence? do people know your business? Do they know what you stand for? So it is all about the values of what people stand behind that brand and how that brand works. So brand became a huge important thing. And if you start to think of what COVID did, how people have now changed their marketing to how they're doing it, that's all about driving brand into the marketplace. But it's driving it in a bigger and more purposeful way that make brand becomes an actual value added part of the business, and there it's part of your asset set. The next one that I looked at was that modus operandi sort of situation, but I looked at it in two ways. I looked at the part that you're talking about from a business point of view. Have you got your business strategy right? Have you got your modus operandi right to grow your business, bring people into the business, etc.? So your onboarding, your training, your development of staff, your retention of those staff, have you got that in place? But then I also looked at the modus operandi of actually delivering out to your candidates and to your clients. And how do you deliver? What do you deliver? What services do you deliver to your candidates and your clients? And it's interesting when we start to think about this. When I go into recruitment agencies, I talk about what service do you give to your clients. You get this list and long list of services, etc. And they don't really know how to use that. And that's where we can start to create the products that we can sell. But when we talk about what do they offer the candidate, the list is very, very short. And yet what everyone suddenly realized now, we're in the biggest candidate short market. Doesn't matter how many jobs you have on. If you haven't got a candidate, you can't place into those jobs. So the candidate is actually the fee generator for you. And yet when we look at our modus operandi and our service to our candidates, we have very little to offer them. So changing that suddenly becomes a very, very different thing. So I think what we're saying, we sort of build our assets, that modus operandi of how we build our business, but how we then deal with our clients and our candidates is really important. And I think the final one is the one we've talked about an awful lot, is that succession planning. And as you said, if you were the leader stepping out of the business, if I took you out of the business, who's stepping up into the business? Who's stepping up to lead the business? Creating a succession plan. I was in Manchester yesterday with a client, and he's got to that point where there's 4 people, and they're now almost running his business for him, and he can now take, for various reasons, take time away from the business, etc., and he feels comfortable. But we've spent 3 years training and developing, getting them to a certain point where they step up.
At the big corporate I work for, we would never buy a business. We would never have even countenanced doing it if we didn't know there was strength of leadership throughout the organization. Because if the entrepreneur who set the business up is going to step away, is there a business left without them? And we just would never countenance it unless you had that next layer of competent, skilled, developed leaders who can take the business on to the next step.
So that leads us to the question we talked about, to reach that desired destination. And every leader seems to have
hard.
Every leader has a sort of view of where that destination is. So what do you think the most single important attribute a leader must have to actually enable them to get to that destination?
It's really interesting, isn't it, Howard? Because I honestly, while we've been planning for this webinar this week, I think, what one skill, that we're going to distill this down to, that's a real tough ask. But actually, for me, it is focus. So it's that ability to know that it is as important to work on your business as it is to work in your business. And it's that ability to plan properly, to know that I have to take time away from the day-to-day job. And I think that's one of the things that recruiters setting up their own businesses struggle most with. Take time out to spend on my business, not in it, and that the faith to know that will have rewards. You can't grow your business without that focus and that ability to plan on, and which links to our whole business planning thing, on doing what your business needs to take you forward, not just to fill today's jobs, but planning to put all the things in place and focused on ultimately what it is you're trying to get to. And that's a tough question, Howard, because there's 1,000 attributes that an effective leader needs.
There are, and it's interesting when people say focus, because I always think of the new Karate Kid with Jackie Chan, and he came out with that immortal line. No, he came out with the immortal line, "Your focus needs more focus," and I thought that was absolutely brilliant from a work point of view, that your focus needs more focus, because we can focus on the right things, we can focus on the wrong things, etc., but your focus needs more focus. And I think when businesses start to grow, the more focused your leaders are, the better they are. So when I sort of wrote the question and sort of looked at the question, again, I'm sort of thinking, right, how do you answer this question? And to me, it came down to one thing. And one thing then would cover multiples of other things. And I said, as a leader, if you want to get to your desired destination, the biggest attribute that you could have is great communication skills. And that does cover a multiple of things. So if the direction needs changing, it needs clarity. And that is vitally important. And that can only come from communication. So if you create clear objectives and then communicate them well, that creates commitment. And if you start to create the commitment with your staff, then what happens, it starts to create commitment with your managers and your suppliers. And then you can focus on gaining the commitment of your candidates and your clients. So that initial clarity of the communication of where you're going and how you're going to get there, to me, is really important to get the people on board with you and therefore moving forward. So hence communication is then also about part of your brand. It's part of your MO. It's about that succession plan where leaders are going to deliver their message. Because what you've got to think is, if you're the only person delivering that message, then it's one person. But if you've got a leadership team delivering the same message with the same passion, then communication becomes a hugely important thing. But then I started to think really deeply about communication. And I started to think about that simple adage, action speaks louder than words. So if we're communicating across a business, then what a business leader is actually doing is setting the principles by which the business will run. And what we tend to happen, if we communicate in one thing and then do something physically that is against that communication, then it breaks all that communication down. So principles and intentions become really important. So if the leader lives by those intentions that they're communicating, then it becomes not only vocal or written, but it becomes a physical action for all to see. So, if you go back to Morabian, 55% of all communication is body language and the movement. So if we were going to separate leaders and managers out, the way you'd separate them out is the communication from your leader will create followers, where communication from your managers maybe create actions. And they're the two things. So I think as a great leader of people, it's how you communicate your direction that you're going on that would really sort of add to them. So it's important, I think, that we look at that. So your focus definitely needs more focus, but how you communicate what you're focusing on then becomes the absolute objective of what's happening out there and how that's going to run from there. So, final question. What to you is the single thing that you should never change once you've set your business plan in place?
I love this question. I feel like sometimes, Howard, we play a game with trying to second guess you with your lovely questions and your plans for this, as to what it is that you're looking for and what your answer is gonna be when you come up with these questions. And this one is a classic Howard question, and I suspect that you and I might differ on this one. And yes, good, as you say. I don't think there is anything that you should never change. I've seen so many times things go wrong or fail because of some, I don't know if this is the right terminology, but some sacred cow that said we mustn't change this. And actually, I don't think that should be the case. I think there should always be the willingness and the ability to view everything that we do, everything we stand for, everything we do, and keep it constantly under review, and be willing to say that's not working for us anymore and we need to change it. So for me, actually, I don't think there is anything that we should never change. And I'm sure we're going to disagree and you're going to come up with something and we can debate it. But I think everything is up for debate and everything is available to change.
It's interesting when I write these questions. Obviously, I write the questions, and I realise that either Paul, Dave, yourself, or everyone's going to be on these. So to me, it's a challenge of how can I sort of stretch your capabilities and stretch your mindsets from there, which then leaves me with the final problem that I go last. So I've got to have something maybe potentially different or the same because I'm going last. So it always creates a bigger problem for me than it does for you guys.
That's what you think.
Because I'm answering the question right at the very end. So I looked at this, and when I started to write about what would I never change, and to me it was one simple thing I would never change. Okay, there's lots of things that you should change and you need to change as you go through that process, because, you know, as you say, you can set a 3-year plan. We normally work on a 3-year plan. You could set a 5-year plan, etc., etc., etc. You know, and there's going to be lots of things that you have to change that go wrong, aren't working, upgrade, develop, buy, build, etc., etc., that needs to go into your plan outside of the sales. But I think if you're going to set a target, a physical figure to reach within a certain period of time, that should never change. And that's the bit that I think that people get a little bit concerned about. And what they start to do is they start to drop the target or lower the target, etc., etc. Yes, you can start to increase the target, but to me, what target that you've set, you should never change that target. And therefore, you're always driving to that one ultimate goal that you want to actually achieve and try grow. So there's lots of things that you could change around that target. But to me, if you've set a figure, I want to have £1 million EBIT, or I want to have this, I want to have that, from a figured point of view, to me, that should never change. Because once you start to change that figure, what it means is that especially if you're bringing it down, is that you're weakening your sort of desire to actually drive and get there. You don't think you're going to get there. So sometimes I think, you know, people set their figures too high, and I have never got a problem with that. How are you going to get there? What are you going to drive to get there? What you're going to be happy with? Sometimes people set them ridiculously low, and you think, right, okay, you're going to smash that within 12, 18 months if we do the right sort of things. But that's fine, because then they can set another figure, and they can keep setting a figure. So it's always either, are you going to stretch yourself and overstretch yourself and push beyond, you know, it's what's that stupid comment, you know, reach for the stars, you might hit the moon type scenario. So I think it was Da Vinci said, it's, you know, it's not the fact that you set targets too high, it's that we set them too low and we achieve them. And that's, to me,
and I don't disagree with the not dropping your targets consistently, because if we've set ourselves a big, hairy, audacious goal, then it would maybe just the time scale to reach it changes, and that we shouldn't drop it, because I think it diminishes it. But I do think sometimes there are circumstances where the financial goal's wrong and we should change it. So, you know, we all know businesses in the last year who have smashed their financial targets out of the water because the market
absolutely
changed. And actually there was no way they should have stayed targeted where they were, because the market was like a market we've never ever seen before. And so I think putting your goals up is always okay. I agree with you, never put them down.
But I mean, I had a client in Leeds that did exactly that, but before the pandemic, they set themselves a really big target to achieve in 5 years, and we achieved it in 2.5. And they were sort of to the point where, right, we've achieved it, really well done. And then they coasted for 6 months. And they suddenly found that they had no desire, they had no aim, they had no purpose of what they were driving for. We then set another target, and all of a sudden it all clicked back straight in again and started to drive it.
There you go. So your financial goal should change, Howard.
Yeah, but they'd hit their financial goal within the timescales. But the same thing you're saying, if you haven't hit your financial goals within your timescale, then you can maybe stretch your timescale. It's the financial goal that you're trying to achieve. That's where we should be going at. So I think there's lots of things that we could talk about on there. And I'm sure if Dave and Paul are here, they'd probably have sort of different views of that and how they work. But that's the idea. So I think today's been a very interesting conversation, listening it from a HR background, a HR perspective on a marketing, a strategy type solution of what's going on. Next week, though, we're going to hit marketing head on. We've invited the head of Thrive Marketing. A lady who's got 16 years, nearly 20 years recruitment experience, opened her own marketing business and is driving lots of marketing into the marketplace. We're going to look at 10 questions that every recruitment leader should ask their marketing department that didn't know what they should ask. So she's going to come up with questions that you probably don't normally ask, but they will look at that. So we're going to look at marketing, cold calling versus marketing, and is your marketing converting followers into leaders? Because what I'm seeing is an awful lot of marketing out there that is all about growing your followers on LinkedIn, which is great, but are you creating those followers into leads and driving those followers into leads? So thanks very much, Heather. Thank you much for your time. It's absolutely always a pleasure working with you. Love today's session. Next week, I'm sure Paul and Dave are back. If not, we'll still be here. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your week. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks very much.
Thank you.